Welcome to Strategy Execution Unlocked and the second episode in our new series, Practitioners Unfiltered. In this series, we sit down with the founding members of the Strategy Execution Forum, practitioners spanning diverse roles and functions and industries, all united by a common mission, helping their organizations to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. Through these candid, unfiltered conversations, we'll explore real-world challenges these leaders face and the innovative solutions they're implementing to master both the art and science of strategy execution. Today, I'm excited to welcome David Harned to the show. David is an executive PMO and agile practice leader with over 2 decades of experience leading global teams in enterprise transformations, portfolio, program, project management, as well as organizational process improvements. He's also an enterprise agility coach with background spanning usability design, digital transformation, and large-scale organizational change. David, thanks for joining me today.
Ben, I'm super pumped. That was a great intro. Thank you. I feel very excited to hear what I have to say.
Well, with that, let's jump in. So let's maybe start with, what strategy execution means to you, because it can mean different things to different people, and maybe the different roles you've held in the space over the years.
Yeah, sure. So I have held a couple of different roles. I've kind of come up through a lot of team sort of agility stuff. I've then come up into running engineering PMOs and really looking at more the, let's say, product and development side of strategy and how to execute, that piece of it. And then more into the enterprise and transformation aspects of strategy execution. And so then, thinking finally, more about the how the enterprise executes strategy in more of that 3 to 5 year horizon. And I think that is really the piece that, I think about mostly nowadays. And so that's sort of where, my head is at as I start to think more about how does the organization execute strategy. And, so I've had a nice, migration, maybe evolution in my career as I've come up that way. So it's felt very natural as I've grown and I like that. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Great. So when you think about strategy execution, what does it actually mean to you?
I think, execution is sort of, two different pieces, right? I think that there's the activity that's associated with it. As someone in the PMO, I think a lot about how execution happens, on the project side, and projects, of course, at the enterprise level get larger and larger. So, but we think a lot about when I say execution, kind of the activities and the process of execution. But I think there's also the outcomes of execution, right? And, I kind of joke in a perfect world, we do no activity and we get all of the outcomes. Right. So that would be the dream. We do nothing and get all the revenue, or we do nothing and get all the customers, or, whatever. So that's really what we want to do. But I think both are super, super important, because we really don't want to do all of the activity, and get no outcomes, because that's a complete waste of time, So I think when I think about strategy, I think about, where do we want to be long term? Where do we want to be now? Where do we want to be in the middle of that, and then what are those, OKRs or KPIs that we need to be thinking about as far as measurement in between now and then. And then, my mind goes to an iterative place, and then how do we continually think about, are we on or off track as we're moving, between now and then, and whether those iterations are, 2 weeks or a month or whatever, towards that, those measurements. And how do we get those measurements as close to real time as possible? And then we can be also watching the activity, and, that gives us that quantitative view, because we can be hopefully getting that real time feedback at the enterprise level, or as close to it as possible. Sometimes finance is working in a more of a quarterly fashion or whatever, but we'd like it to be quicker than that. But how do we get those quantitative views? And then we've also got our project managers, we've got our PMO people, we've got our agility coaches, we've got all of these different people that can help us with the qualitative side as well. How is everybody doing? Is it red, yellow, green? Do we feel like we're meeting stakeholders' expectations? Are the teams running okay? how are things going? And then we really get that full view, both the number side and the people side.
Yeah, no, I think it's important then, right, to balance, both that kind of long-term strategic plan with that kind of shorter time frame iterative execution as well, right? Especially to engage the executive team. Now, how's that work for you in terms of working with executives to make sure strategy is clearly defined and communicated across the organization, and you're balancing that, multi-year plan versus the day-to-day execution?
Yeah, no, it's fair. It's a great question, and one that's, an interesting solution. And it depends, by organization. I'm obviously familiar with the organizations that I've worked with. And I did work at one organization for quite a while. If you take a look at my background, I've kind of flexed and morphed within the organization that I worked for, over time. I think in our case, we've had changes in the C-suite and the executives and things like that have happened. And I think with that comes a change in the way that the organization metabolizes the work and the strategy and everything else. But I think the important thing is that I guess when I think about moving towards that strategy, I'm very diligent about the size of the efforts. You can just grabbing an example out of thin air, but I mean, if if you're going to do an ERP, let's say project, that can very easily be a multi-year project. Very very easily, and probably already is. So you want to think about as you move through these multi-year projects, you've got budgeting cycles that are happening annually. You've got different elements of running an organization that are going to sort of go over calendar years or strategic cycles, or even CEO changes and things like that. And I think that it's dangerous to have projects that are that large. So I like to try and break these projects into 6-month elements, 6-month value chunks. Again, sort of that iterative concept, and say, what can we deliver in this 6-month iteration? And so that's the way that I think about sort of moving, in that fashion towards strategy. And the way that I interact with the executives is I work with them to say, okay, we've got all of these, like, let's say 6-month projects, and we really want to try and keep that list as short as we can. It very quickly can balloon into 20, 30, most important projects, that are going on within the organization. But, you really want to challenge that. And you want to say, hey, are there really truly 30 most important things that need to be going on right now all at the same time? Maybe there's 10, maybe there's whatever. But then I would say, you want to iteratively look at that list and say, is these 30 things super, super critical that we do right this minute to move us towards strategy? And there's lots of discussion that needs to happen. And prioritization is a concept that has lots of inputs. It's not as easy as revenue or customers or, even political. So what does the board want, or what's most important right this minute, and things like that. So this is where I use the executives to hopefully prioritize kind of in an agile fashion what's most important to the organization. I think the other piece that you and I have chatted a little bit about too is this concept of how on board are the executives with these processes and the concepts. Some of this is kind of a new way of thinking for them, and you've got people who are really excited about it, and they're like, yeah, let's do this. We want to iteratively be thinking about the value that this organization is creating. And then you've got people who have never heard of any of this, and they've always just kind of done it the way they've done it. And then you've got people that are sort of like, yeah, okay, that sounds like a fun exercise, but I'd rather just do it the way I've been always doing it, and I don't really have any interest in trying your way. Like, I kind of get it, but I don't really want to do that. And I think that's where the real meat of my job comes in, is is more influence instead of control. So it's working with those people and trying to demonstrate the value and starting to influence those people. Hopefully that answers your question. There was a lot of things I just said right there, but hopefully that all kind of makes sense.
No, absolutely. But obviously, getting that executive buy-in, right, is key to developing. I talk about developing the strategy execution muscle across the organization, right? One of the reasons I
Mhm.
founded the Strategy Execution Forum was, I really think that the needle hasn't moved that much for organizations over the years in terms of how they systematically drive execution from strategy at the enterprise level, right down. There's pockets of excellence within most organizations, but getting that executive buy-in is absolutely critical. And I think it's tough to get that buy-in in terms of this is how we're going to do it, the mechanics of executing or the mechanics of overhauling the operating model. It's got to start first with, there's a burning platform, right? We are less competitive, performance is being impacted because of our suboptimal strategy execution capabilities. In other
Yeah.
words, value is being eroded, right? And now, trust me, as a organizational change expert, I'm going to go and look at our organization and personalize an operating model with the intent of reclaiming lost or business value, or maximizing business value and accelerating business value. Because the reality is, organizations are losing business value or losing value on the table, but they're also deferring business value based on delays and other things, right? So it is hemorrhaging. So I just wonder what your thoughts are there, right? Because a lot of times the executives don't care about how project management or whatever flavor or flavors is being utilized, but I wonder how much they care or acknowledge the fact that there is a value realization problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you talk about sort of hemorrhaging value, like, like how much are we willing to give up in order to see the value, that we want, or maybe sacrifice value for speed or sort of things like that, right? Like loss, heat to friction or whatever.
Mhm.
It's and there's two elements that popped into my head as you were talking there. First is when you're thinking about an operating model, in general, and it depends on the size of the org. And, I mean, we've got, the organization that I was working with, was sort of around the 1,000 people to 1,500 people kind of size, which
Mhm.
is still kind of a
Yeah.
manageable size when you're dealing with, sort of the entire organization and getting a cadence and a rhythm running for that size of an organization. But when you're dealing with developers and engineers and like that side of it, um, they all have a rhythm. They run pretty well. Like they kind of feel iterative already. And engineers and developers, and at least on the software side, which is kind of where I was coming from, they already work in an iterative patterns. Like they're
Mhm.
used to that. They already do that. Like, so they're very comfortable in those ways. And so it's kind of the rest of the org, right? That you're sort of focused on. Those guys are already running. They're doing their thing, and so you just need to make sure they're doing it as well as they can, which is great. And generally, you've got people to help them with that, and so you keep an eye on all of that. But they're more mature, I guess, is what I'm saying, in the way that they're running. So now you're focused on other areas of the organization, but and they're going to work in all kinds of different patterns. You've got like your marketing functions, you've got HR, you've got finance groups, and finance can mean like order entry, it can mean like like settling the books, it can mean like payroll, it can mean like it can be all kinds of different things. It can be payments in, payments out, like all kinds of wacky stuff can go on, and they're all going to have their own processes. And ideally they're working in some sort of pattern that they want help, but the PMO can provide assistance to any or all of those different functions. But if you start laying in processes that are too heavy, they're all going to kind of reject them, and they're going to be like, oh my god, I'm already busy, I don't have time to deal with all of that. So again, influence over control, but you want to provide value, to all of those different sort of pieces of the organization. But whatever model you're building needs to be flexible enough to sort of accommodate all of that. So if you're going to run in some sort of iterative pattern at the organizational level with your operating model, you really have to be able to sort of flex and be able to accommodate all of that. So you really need that sort of minimum viable framework that will support all of these different ways that people want to work or are working, um, and let them consume priority from the organization, and but also give them a pathway to execute or to escalate problems as they're running into those in as fast of a way as possible, and create a culture of autonomy so that ideally they can solve their own problems and not escalate stuff that's pointless, or, that they shouldn't be escalating in the first place. Solve your own problems and escalate the important stuff so that we don't have to deal with everything.
Yeah, so
So really that's a key element there,
yeah,
you know.
absolutely. But that
Now,
enterprise function
yeah, go
that
ahead. I had a
that,
second piece too, but go ahead
yeah.
and respond to that. Yeah.
No, I think that enterprise function then is really looking at ensuring alignment and value maximization, while allowing for autonomy of governance, autonomy of execution within each of the functions or sub portfolios, right?
And you still need that governance, right? Like you still need the governance. It's not just like a free for all, which takes me to sort of that second piece, right? Which is like the centralized approach, which is what we want with this operating model, versus a decentralized approach, which again, if you go up to that executive level and you've got execs up there that are sort of like, cool, that sounds great. You do that, and then I'm going to do it my way, right? What happens then is you end up with decentralized activities that are kind of in the same direction, right? But they're totally running on their own in their own operating model or whatever. So now they're running in a decentralized pattern, which is also okay, like in a way, like I've run in a decentralized pattern and had a lot of success that way, but it's different than when you're trying to run with a centralized PMO and you're trying to run in a centralized operating model and you're trying to, now it's a little more, it's the friction that we're talking about before. Now you've got loss of value that's falling out because they're generally running in the same direction, but underneath, like you've got stuff that's falling out because they are not really connected to the rest of the machine. The rest of the operation of the organization is different. It's disconnected. They're sort of running next to you, not with you, And so I think that's an important piece of it, right? Is like, and that sort of comes from, the leadership piece as well.
No, I think
yeah.
I think there's two lenses to look at that fragmentation through, right? Or decentralization versus centralization. The first is, the different portfolios, IT, finance, business, different parts of the business units, whatever, that all executing their own important projects, initiatives that, hopefully align with the strategy, right? And maybe there needs to be an autonomy of governance and definitely autonomy of execution, as long as it's aligned to those minimal governance controls or operating model controls at the enterprise level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's managing the kind of activities and work that across the organization. The other way to look at this is through the lens of it takes a village to orchestrate strategy execution across the organization. And
absolutely.
Those same functions, whether it's finance in terms of, FP&A and budgeting and forecasting, whether it's, business architecture or strategy and ops and enterprise architecture in terms of looking at how the operating model of the organization, the business, the operating fabric, even the organization is going to align with the strategy in the future. I've seen a lot of times that there are a lot of teams and functions, right, PMOs as well, right, that need to work together to build that cohesive operating model across the organization, designed to, plug the leaks in the plumbing, right, where value is seeping through, right, and often they're not working necessarily purposely counter to one another, but they have their own, as you said, their own processes, their own tooling. You actually end up with a fragmented operating model where value sleeps through, versus actually saying, look, when I think about bringing these functions together, when I think about critical processes like strategic portfolio management or business architecture or enterprise architecture or project execution or whatever flavor, and of course change management, right? How do we bring these things together so they're not working counter to one another? That you get that multiplier effect because you're personalizing it, to your organization as well, right?
So. Yeah. And to be fair, I think in what I'm describing, everyone has the intent of delivering as much value as they can, right? Within their function, within their groups, and so that there's no ill intent. Right here, like everybody's trying to deliver as much as they possibly can, no matter what they're doing. So I've got positive intent behind all of this, right? And so, just to be super clear about that, there's no intent to destroy anybody else, right? So I mean, I think, yeah. So I mean, you're absolutely right. So when the machine hums, when it's all synchronized, it runs really well. It just runs. And actually, it's a lot like like a system. It's a complex system, right? It's like once you get it all running well, then it feeds itself. Like it just has its own inertia and it starts to run. And that's what you would want from an operating model. Now, obviously, it's like spinning plates. It's like once you start looking over here, everything starts breaking over there. So you're constantly sort of moving around in trying to make sure that it's all running well. But I think, yeah, it's just, and that's the game, right? I mean, that's what we're doing here. So that's okay. And that's why they need the PMO, and that's why they need us to be doing what we're doing, is because that's what we're thinking about. So ideally we're the ones that are making sure that this whole machine is running. We're going around making sure that everything's running correctly, and we're looking for problems and we're fixing them, and that's okay. So and we got the eye on the iterative patterns, so we're looking for that weekly value, and if something qualitatively slips from green to yellow, we're going to keep an eye on that, and we're going to make sure that we jump in and handle that. If it something starts to slip, we'll see it in the numbers, we'll see it in the statuses, we'll see it in the and we'll just kind of swarm on that and figure out what's going on over here, and we'll start to pay attention to that. And that's where the autonomy kicks in as well, because it's really important that people feel comfortable to go, hey, I've got a problem. Right? If they don't feel comfortable doing that because the culture isn't quite right, then uh-oh, because you're gonna have a problem that's going on over there and no one's gonna see it, and then uh-oh, then we've got a real big problem that's gonna be it's gonna hit us out of left field, and that's really, really bad. So yeah. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention, and I think when we get to the operating model sort of being flexible enough to accommodate, I think when you look at a lot of these frameworks, these agile frameworks for enterprises, in theory, all of them would sort of just plug right into your enterprise and they're all going to run great, and, things like that. But I think as you start to apply them, and I kind of alluded to this before, is like a lot of pieces of your enterprise are going to run in their own way and kind of different, and you're going to have a difficult time kind of just sort of saying, well, this is how you need to do it. I've never done your job, but this is how, from now on, you're going to do it like this, and that's going to be a real challenge. And I would argue you're going to have limited success if you try and, get people to do things like that. So, what I would say is that when I say agile, and what I mean by agile, is I think iterative. I think, looking at it repeatedly, right? So not quarterly, shorter than that, so where we're kind of working in these monthly patterns, ideally even shorter than that, just constantly reevaluating, reassessing, are we still doing the most important thing? How is it going? That kind of a thing. Looking at, is this still the most important thing? What is the most important thing to the organization? Now, ideally not changing the priority every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's very disruptive. So you don't want to do that. As an organization, like, well, 2 weeks ago, this was important. Now, 2 weeks later, you're going to annihilate your organization. Don't do that, but you want the ability to do it. Like if you need to do it, you can pivot the organization. But the point is looking at it and making sure this is still important. This is still important. And then also, again, creating those pathways for escalation, if you need that. So we've got that. And then that culture piece. And that's what I mean by agile. So when I say agile, I don't mean the whole company's doing Scrum or the whole company's doing Kanban or whatever. Like, I don't necessarily mean that, but the organization is agile because it's following these patterns. That allows the organization to adapt, and allows the organization to be iterative, and allows the organization to follow those kinds of patterns and accept change and embrace change, and those kinds of things, and when you get these multi-year projects, and if you're the most important thing is these 4 projects, and all 4 of these projects are going to last 2 or 3 years. Now all your resources are tied up in these multi-year projects, and you're stuck. Like you're just stuck. You're not going to deliver any value for multiple years. That's not a good place to be as an organization, And so I think that's sort of where my mindset is when I think about agile and I think about an enterprise. I want
So
value coming out the door in an iterative pattern, right? And so
So it's value focus based on enterprise agility, not necessarily
move.
any one way of working. I feel like, as long as I've been in this space, so going back to the very early 2000s, if not earlier, actually, we've, as a industry, we've always been plagued with these kind of one size fits all approaches, which the reality is, fits no one, right? And because the PMO, again, as you said at the front, concerns himself often with the activities and gets down into the minutia of the activities, often there's a tendency to start bottom up thinking, right? When I think back to project and portfolio management, when Gartner termed that space, about 2004 timeframe, and they wanted to bring the two P's together, project and portfolio management, because they wanted to select the right work and then deliver the right work effectively, right? What it felt like to me was that PPM then went into a kind of bottom up approach. The guys focused on running the PMOs were more execution focused, so they started bottom up with all the ducks in a row from a timesheeting point of view, and deferred the kind of portfolio P to a degree. I saw the same thing happen again, when we decided to move to agile ways of working, right? PPM, aka waterfall behavior. That was the problem. So we need to move to agile ways of working, elevated to then project to product.
Right.
And it absolutely made sense, right? But again, when people started to implement that, they again started bottoms up, right? They started with new ways of working for the agile teams, which made absolute sense for them, until they ran into the problem of portfolio management. That's where SAFe and other things came in. So there's a natural tendency when this discipline is owned by the important execution people to start bottom up. You've got to have your ducks in a row before you can do portfolio management. But that's untrue, right? And I think that's a good distinction now of this enterprise function, right? There's a danger, because not every organization has an enterprise office, PMO, strategy execution office, transformation office, whatever you want to call it, right? But you've got to start with top-down thinking as much as, and that, as you've talked about, the autonomy of execution, so that you can focus on value. Obviously, there's a lot of talk today about the PMO becoming outcome-focused, value-centric, and absolutely they should have done years ago, and a lot did.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as we talked about, it's more than just the project execution activities, right? Value is leaking because of problems with the business architecture, problems with the enterprise architecture. So whether that function does get called an enterprise PMO, I just want to make sure that those leaders are thinking about bringing together those other important functions, like a Lego set, right, to make sure that everything's addressed. Because if you just look at the execution piece, yes, you're gonna reclaim value, you're gonna maximize value, but you could be hemorrhaging value over here too, right? So
okay, absolutely agree. And again, I'm sort of thinking of two different things as you're talking there. Totally agree with a lot of what you just said. One thing that I saw very successfully work, and actually really loved it, was the PMO as part of the strategy sort of group within an organization. And I think this actually resonates really nicely with what StrategyXF is all about, and what you're talking about. I think you have in the enterprise, you've got this sort of group that's sort of focused on, where do we want to go? Like, what does the horizon look like? What is the strategy, of the organization? And I first of all, yes, the organization absolutely needs that, but they're really thinking about what the organization needs to do, right? What do we need to be? That kind of piece. You're sort of ultimately you're sort of backlog for the org, if you want to think of it like that. I do, because that's me. But then you've got your PMO, and your PMO kind of represents how you're going to get there, the operating model, the processes you're going to follow, the execution of that, and it might agile or not, it doesn't matter, but like how you're going to get there, right? And we've got the people to help with that. So when you pair together that sort of strategy and execution, it's like perfect. It's like that describes the function you're talking about, I think, really, really nicely. And I was a part of that and saw that work. And it's beautiful. I think it's perfect. Like, I think it resonates, again, hums really nicely with what you're describing. And I think I saw that work very well. the other piece that I was going to mention, it's easy to start with the bottom up because the teams see the value right away. Like they feel it. They literally feel it, so they get the value. Um, I think that, we talked a little bit before about C-suite acceptance and buy-in and all that stuff. In general, it's not hard for the C-suite to get on board. I mean, I'm speaking generally. Like they see the value it can bring, and they want that value. Like they're like, yes, please bring us that value. So they want that too. One of the struggles, so your top down is not too tough. Bottom up is almost easy. It's the middle of the organization that can be really challenging. That middle layer of management can be really tough, because I think their role has to change in all of this. And when you're asking for especially on the culture side, when you're asking all of those middle managers, and the bigger orgs that's a lot of people, those middle managers, right? And you're asking them to change their behavior and really shift from more of that traffic cop to, more of like a coach kind of role, right? So they become less of the telling you what to do kind of guy, or person, sorry, and more of a leader, like more of a, I'm going to help you be the best version of whatever skill you have, right? So the just grabbing again out of thin air, but like let's say I run quality, and then I now go from assigning your work to you to now helping you be the best quality person that you can possibly be. And when that shift happens, that's actually a really good shift, to take and to make, but it's weird. It's weird because you have to give up control, because now you're giving up control to the project, to, the teams, to the autonomy, to the right. And that's a difficult shift. So, I think that can also be very challenging when you're trying to do a lot of this sort of enterprise level, culture change and stuff like that. So it's just another thing I was thinking about as you were talking about that bottoms up approach. You can get it to here, and then you start running into some problems culturally even, that can be challenging.
And that's one of the reasons why at StrategyXF we talk about the art and science, right? I attribute the science to the different frameworks and other things in terms of making this happen. The art of this, I think, is more the human dimension, right? The cultural stuff, the political hurdle obstacles you've got to overcome. Another reason why I think it's critical to have the executive buy-in to be able to drive that change across the organization, right?
Absolutely.
Because as long as I've been doing this, at the surface, visibility and transparency seems like it should be a good thing, right? But at that middle level in the organization, not always it's thought of that way. Right?
Yeah. Anyway, yep.
So looking forward right now, how do you see strategy execution evolving from here?
Sure. I think the things that I think about as far as moving forward, I think that everybody's accelerating. And with that comes a certain degree of chaos, that we're all sort of dealing with at the moment, right? You've got AI that's introduced and everybody's talking about it. I won't dwell too much on it, but I think that is part of the acceleration, and I think everybody's trying to figure out how to harness that. And I think while they're doing that, it needs to stabilize just a little bit right now because we're in that sort of chaos moment. I think that the concept of agility is fading a little bit. I think that it's becoming more a way of working. And, and so you've got organizations that have figured it out and they're doing great or doing better than their competitors. And then you've got organizations that haven't and they're not.
So when you say agility there, you're talking more about agile execution versus enterprise agility failing, right?
Yeah, I guess what I mean is there's organizations that have learned how to adapt, to meet the needs of their customers or their markets or whatever, and sort of react to that. And there's a variety of ways to do that. I've suggested a few on this call, that you and I have discussed. And I know that I don't have all the answers. So there are others, I'm sure, that I, haven't thought of or haven't experienced yet. So, I guess, but my point is like that some organizations have figured it out, and the ones that have remained rigid or have not adapted or are not able to adapt are going to not do well. I guess the concept of agility is becoming just the way that businesses run, is that adaptive sort of pattern and the ability to react to things. Um, it's going to become successful businesses versus not. And we'll see the same with AI. I was watching a podcast one time, and it's the example that they gave, and this is not my example, but it's someone else's, and it was like, is AI going to replace lawyers? Well, maybe eventually, I don't know, but in the short term, no, it's not. But lawyers that use AI will replace lawyers that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the way that I sort of see this too. I think enterprises that have figured out how to leverage the tools and the processes that are available to them will be more successful, and they will win over the ones that do not. Right now, I think that the human side is still very important. I think while, every team is different. And when I say team, I mean loosely executives, managers, teams of people executing projects. That could be developers, that could be anybody, like, a list of things that need to get done. They're all still humans. And as long as they're humans, then I think people like coaches and people like project managers and people like that are still very, very important. I think once you take away the humans, then I think things are going to be a lot different. So I think, that's kind of where I think about it now. As far as the strategy piece, I guess, I think it's just very critical that we were able to measure, and so I see a lot of, um, well, we want to be here, we want to do this, we want to do that, but then not really concrete measurements that we want to hit. So it's just very important that, we want to be the best in the industry at blah. Okay, well, how will I know when I'm the best in the industry at that?
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? And like, how do I measure it? What is best? What does that actually mean? So making sure that everything's measurable, that I have a way to measure it, and that I can, know when I'm there, or at least on the way, and going the right way, so that I know what the ultimate strategy looks like, and I know what the steps are along the way, and then I can measure those as I go. I think that that's the piece where, a lot of it falls down. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
No,
Hopefully that answered your question.
no, yeah, absolutely does. Yeah, I
Okay.
appreciate it. So
Yeah.
I don't want to take too much more of your time. I really appreciate you joining the show today. Hopefully we can do another episode on Strategy Execution Unlocked, and of course, looking forward to collaborating with you as a founding member of the Strategy Execution Forum, David.
Yeah, I'm excited to be a part of it, and these are my favorite topics, so I could talk about them all day long. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks.